Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dalton.
I'm going to welcome you again to the Brave New Weed podcast because this is our second episode. I was wondering what you listeners out there thought of our first one, if you managed to tune in. It was our interview with Ethan Nadelman, who used to head the Drug Policy Alliance. I'd like to know what you think because, I've not done podcasting before, and when you start, it's like you're talking into a black hole. I have no response from anybody. So please, listeners, send me some feedback. You can reach us at bravenewweed.com, or you can send us an email also through that address. We'd really like to hear what you think, and we can change anything if you want to know about it. So our guest today is Dr. Julie Holland, who is one of the most controversial psychiatrists, thinkers, and authors out there who's exploring the world of substances. And I'm really excited to talk to her today. I always love talking to Julie. She really was probably the first person I spoke to when I decided to try to write Brave New Weed. I went to her and I said, should I do this? And she said, it's the most amazing plant. It can change your life. It can make you feel all sorts of things, and it's the most maligned plant. And she gave me an incredible rundown in about 15 minutes of, yes, why I should bother spending 4 years working on this book. So I owe a lot to Julie, and I think she's going to tell you a whole lot that you didn't know either. So with me is our co-host, Matthew Hendershot.
Hey, Joe. How you doing today?
I have a cold, as you can hear,
Yeah,
but I'm happy to be doing
that.
this with you. And first, we're going to talk about some news.
Yep, let's get into it.
Matthew, I opened up my computer today and I saw something amazing about Mexico, Argentina. What was the third country?
They're joining the ranks of 4 South American countries. But of course, the big news is Mexico. Mexico's lower house of Congress has passed the bill to legalize the use of marijuana and cannabis for medical and scientific purposes.
Okay, but wait a second. That's the lower house of the Mexican Congress.
That's right.
That's not a full thing yet, right?
No, but it is a full thing because the bill actually hit the Senate in Mexico in December, and now it's off to President Enrique Peña Nieto, who is expected to sign it into law.
Maybe that'll do something positive for his incredibly abysmal popularity ratings. Let's see. What about Argentina,
You can
though?
almost carbon copy that for Argentina, except it goes in the opposite direction. The Argentinian Senate has passed the bill to legalize medical cannabis. Congress approved it last year about the same time.
That's extraordinary. So what are the other countries in South America? Uruguay,
Mexico, Colombia, and Chile, all which have in very recent time passed medical marijuana.
this is something that it's going to be like a Walkman, I think. It's going to be the thing you didn't know you need until you have it. I think that's the future of medical marijuana, actually. Most people don't understand it. They don't know what it is. It's taken me years to figure it out. Mm-hmm. Once people get access to this and use it for conditions like sleeplessness or pain or anxiety, it's the only one that has no side effects.
Sure.
Even aspirin kills 3,200 people a year. Aspirin. Did you know that?
Or no, wait. But that statistic is slightly flawed because some of those are choking deaths.
I don't know, but it's part of the problem. Even the NSAIDs like ibuprofen or Aleve, they're also associated with some pretty uncomfortable conditions. So this is the only substance on Earth that has no deleterious side effects. It's pretty powerful.
Also, last time I checked, I can't randomly stumble upon wild aspirin bushes growing around.
Good point. Oh, it's called willow bark. That's what aspirin was derived from. But we could talk about that another time. What other news? What happened in Colorado? Something interesting there too, right?
Yeah, well, the Argentinian and Mexican legalization actually feeds into our second piece of news because it affects the drug war in general. We talked a lot about it last week, and now a couple big moves on that front. Beginning in Colorado, of course, Governor Hickenlooper has passed a bill that bans cops from arresting anyone over marijuana.
I don't understand what that means.
Yeah, so it's a little complicated, and the bill itself doesn't necessarily mention marijuana specifically, but what the bill does do is bar police from expending any budget or participating in anything that violates state law. So if the state law allows it, the police have to basically stand aside should the federal government step in and start leveraging them to take
So
action.
what does this mean in the real world? Come on.
Well, it means that if the DEA comes in and says, hey, we're going to raid this pot facility in Colorado, they cannot use any local SWAT teams. They cannot use any local police. The police are barred from participating in the raid.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal because the cops have been doing the dirty work for the DEA ever since there's been the war on drugs.
Absolutely.
Oh, that is a huge deal. Well, let's see what happens with that one. So we're going to have Colorado at war with the DEA.
Well,
I like that idea.
It ties into a couple other things. One is a great article that came out. This was featured in the Cannabist, but I'm sure you can find this stuff all over. And it is a interview with Governor Hickenlooper where he talks about meeting with Jeff Sessions and discussing the enforcement from the federal level, specifically around marijuana and around immigration.
And
So Hickenlooper's impression after meeting with Jeff Sessions is that the crackdown on marijuana simply isn't coming.
yeah, but I'm a little dubious of Hickenlooper's perception. I mean, he always badmouthed marijuana when the voters of his state voted for it. He was very dubious of it. So I'm not sure he's the most perceptive of all people. And Sessions is also known for being very charming.
Yeah, sure.
He is known as a charmer.
Perceptive or not, I will point out a quote from this article that says, he certainly was very direct. This is quoting Governor Hickenlooper. He certainly was very direct and clearly said that they've got a lot of priorities. And at one point he said, subquote, well, you haven't seen us cracking down yet, have you? I simply responded, no.
Means very little, but we'll keep watching. You know, I'm the paranoid one here. Matthew's the positive one. He's the optimist, and I'm a little more dubious of all
I
these
really
guys.
hope. And you know, honestly, I'm gonna add a little bit more to this news article because I got one more thing that falls on my side of this.
Go on, Mr.
And
Optimist.
This is from Real Clear Politics article referencing a interview with Department of Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. In the interview, when Chuck Todd, who was doing the interview, pressed him on medical marijuana legalization, and anything with that, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kelly responded with one sentence: marijuana is not a factor in the drug world.
That would be amazing. If the entire DEA got that idea, it would really change things in this country.
He goes on to say that their focus is really on three things: methamphetamine, almost all of which is produced in Mexico; heroin, almost all of which is produced in Mexico; and cocaine that comes from further south. Those three drugs result in the death of, I think, in last year, this is quoting him, up to about 52,000 people, to include opiates, and that is a massive problem.
I'll bet you, and I don't know this, but I'll bet you opiates are the majority of any of those deaths.
I imagine so.
Those that are written by our kind and beneficent doctors.
And you compare and contrast that to the big fat zero under the column for marijuana.
Because it never has killed anybody. Okay, so enough of that. So there was an interesting poll that came out from Yahoo. Did you see it this week?
I did not, but you were telling me about it. It sounds like there's some really
Yahoo is a
interesting stuff.
very mainstream news organization with 1 billion users, so it's a pretty wide sample. And they did some interesting stuff. A lot of it is what we know to be true, insight into the obvious, such as the majority of people who smoke pot have used it before family functions.
Before family
Like
what kind of
Christmas
family
dinner.
function?
Come on, Christmas dinner, Passover, Easter. We've all used it for those moments because it just makes it easier.
And you get the best 1-2 punch, right? It tames your interaction with family,
Yes, it
like
keeps you-
tolerance down, but also stimulates you and lifts you up for the joyous celebration.
It keeps you a little calmer, I think. And some people the majority of users have also used it at funerals, which I found also interesting.
There were a couple of interesting negative responses in this poll. And maybe not negative, but very low numbers to some things that wouldn't be as intuitive, right?
I thought it was strange that a lot of people said they didn't want to smoke pot in front of their children. I thought that was a very odd thing because to me it seems like if we can normalize this, like having a glass of wine or a beer and being able to talk about this in front of kids,
Right.
be really a useful thing to sort of getting it more acceptable into the world.
And modeling responsible use.
Yeah, modeling responsible use. And so this is interesting. I want to ask you what you think most Americans in the Yahoo survey said, okay? So
sure.
do you think most of them approve of a sports athlete using cannabis for pain?
I personally would say yes. I would approve of professional athletes using drugs for pain, and I put that to all drugs because I'm like mutant league football. Like, let them roid up, and I'll pay good money to see that on a professional level.
All right.
But that's just me.
So the majority of Americans, 69%, say yes, they should use cannabis for pain relief. Okay, here's another one. Do you think that the majority of users use cannabis just for fun?
I would bet that they do, but I bet that they wouldn't admit to it.
Did you look at these results?
I have not.
Exactly what happened. Only 20% admit using it for fun, which is really weird.
I don't
However,
understand that.
70%, almost 70% say they love using it for sex, which is really smart. Okay?
Which is also fun, I think.
I think so too. So maybe their definition of fun is not you or my definition of fun.
I'm going with a little bit of.
So what do you think? Do the majority of Americans approve of their retirement fund investing in marijuana farms or businesses?
Oh, wow. I would say.
Come on.
I bet they don't. I bet they don't.
50 by a slight majority, 51% do not approve, which is insane given the amount of money that's going to be coming into the cannabis industry in the next couple of years.
I can also understand the sort of like risk evaluation of I would hate to invest in a company that then, our friend Jeff comes down and smashes.
You think because of the politics it's still too risky?
It's possible.
And what do you think about this one? Do the majority of people think pregnant women should use cannabis to relieve symptoms of discomfort in pregnancy?
I bet that is a societal bias towards no.
Yeah, it really is. However, even though the evidence suggests that there is good reason for certain women to use it to alleviate some of the symptoms of nausea and discomfort.
That might also be a question-based problem because there's lots of ways to use cannabis that are not smoking cannabis. So if that was in there, everybody's taught, oh, don't smoke while you're pregnant, but maybe you can vape some cannabis.
So that brings us to our guest today, Julie Holland, who's a psychiatrist and a psychopharmacologist who practices in New York. And Julie has some very interesting and somewhat controversial opinions on using substances and using cannabis in particular, and how it should be used and how we can maybe normalize it a bit more. She is the author of about four books. One is called The Pot Book, simply enough. One is called Ecstasy, A User's Guide. Another is called the brilliantly titled Moody Bitches. And her first book was about running the ER at Bellevue, one of the biggest, most insane hospitals in New York City. So Julie's been through a lot of wars. She's a drug warrior, and I'm glad to have her on our side. So let's welcome Dr. Julie Holland. I want to ask you a question. If you were pregnant, would you use cannabis?
It depends if I needed to use cannabis, like if I was vomiting and couldn't stop vomiting and the only option was to go into the hospital and get medication for vomiting, then yes, I would definitely use cannabis.
How about if you were nauseous?
If the nausea couldn't be treated any other way and I was losing weight and it was endangering the baby, then yes, I would also use cannabis. I mean, there really is no strong evidence at all that cannabis during pregnancy is bad for the baby. If I had a good reason to use it, I think that if the benefits outweigh the risks, then you go ahead and use that medicine.
But would your idea be to use as few substances as possible during a pregnancy?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I guess you mentioned, if the benefits outweigh the risks, it sounds like you have identifiable risks. What are the risks to cannabis use if you're pregnant?
Well, I think that there may be one study that shows low birth weight. In general, there really haven't been a preponderance of studies showing that cannabis use is harmful in pregnancy.
I was reading that study today, actually, and it said that the difference in weight is half a pound in the baby. Yeah. And I was talking to another OBGYN family medicine person, and she said, there's not one woman I know that wouldn't get rid of half a pound of a baby to make her birth easier, basically.
Well, look, that may be true, but half a pound isn't nothing. If you're talking about a 5 or 6 pound baby, that is a bit of a percentage. So, but it is true. I mean, I remember when I was a medical student and I witnessed a bunch of deliveries, and one of them had like a preemie of a lower birth weight, and that mom looked a lot better than any of the other moms I saw. So I was like, You got a good small baby. It's kind of mental note, not the worst thing in the world. But, I mean, obviously, the risk and benefits thing that you're weighing is that you need to get proper nutrition so the baby is healthy. And if you're nauseous and vomiting and you're not eating, that is not a good situation to be in for your baby. So if there is a medicine that's going to quell your nausea and help you eat, and there's really not strong evidence it's going to harm the baby, then that's the medicine that you would use.
So why do you think every so often you'll see a thing in the New York Times on the front page that says, perhaps there's going to be problems. Perhaps it's harmful to moms who are pregnant, cannabis use. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, this is sort of getting at the bigger issue of why cannabis is illegal in the first place. And
let's go there.
Okay, so it's not really based on medicine. It's not based on science. I mean, the early laws about cannabis were really based on corporate greed, and they used xenophobia and racism in order to pass the laws. But we, because of our puritanical roots, we are very suspicious of anything that makes us feel good or giddy or giggly. Our country has sort of a collective phobia around euphoria.
Euphorophobia, we call that.
Yeah. So I think that is, one piece of why cannabis is illegal.
Julie, do you medicate or do you smoke pot?
When I am premenstrual or have terrible cramps, then I would say that I'm medicating, but I think the rest of the month I'm just probably using it as a preventative anti-inflammatory medicine.
So I have another question.
Which would mean that I was just smoking pot.
You're so uninflamed today.
Right.
Gosh, you look like you have no inflammation today. We were at a conference the other day, and you said something very interesting. There was a guy running a dispensary who was making a very hard line between recreational and medical cannabis, and he didn't want anything to do with recreation. And I was very admiring of you when you stopped him and said, I'm a psychiatrist, and a lot of people think that fun is really good for your mental health. And I think it took his breath away. Is that an unusual position for your field, psychiatry?
Well, it may be an unusual position, but it is one that I've held since the 80s when I was researching and educating people about ecstasy, about MDMA. And everybody was, making these big distinctions between therapeutic use and recreational use. And I felt that dichotomy is, not really an accurate one, and that it is a spectrum. And as a psychiatrist, I definitely feel that anything that is recreational has the potential to be therapeutic, that just relaxing and enjoying yourself is good for your body, is good for your brain, and you can consider that to be therapeutic.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not a position widely held by many doctors. Am I correct?
That is probably true.
So which makes me always question, is it really a good idea to be putting the future of cannabis into the hands of your stalwart profession?
That's an excellent question. I think a lot of people would have that same question, like, why are these guys in charge of things?
Well, when you hear medical panels going on, it seems that, I have to say, I don't mean this in any egotistic way, but having written this book and researched it for 3 years, it sounds like I know more about the studies that have been done than most doctors.
Right. Well, I think that unless the doctors are particularly interested in cannabis, they are not going to be well informed about cannabis. It's not something anybody learned in medical school. There was certainly no talk of the endocannabinoid system when I was in medical school. And doctors aren't taught about medicinal plants. They're not comfortable using plants at all. They're not comfortable using any sort of inhaled method of administration except for, nebulizers for asthma. So the fact that it's a medicinal plant, the fact that mostly the way it's most commonly ingested is through inhalation already puts doctors at a tremendous disadvantage. They don't know a lot about those things. And we don't like to not know about things.
Yeah. You like to know a lot.
Yeah. Doctors are not comfortable where they don't know a lot of information. So, and also I think that doctors are a pretty conservative bunch. So, maybe less so in psychiatry, but you're fighting against a lot of entrenchment and sort of preconceptions when you're trying to get doctors on board with medicinal cannabis. And I think that as much as I hate the New York law, and we can talk about that ad nauseum, I think that the New York law probably makes doctors more comfortable because there is no whole smoked flower. There are extracts, there are pills, there's sublingual tinctures. I think it makes the doctors a little more comfortable that everything is sort of homogenized and commodified, and they're very clear milligram amounts and ratios, things like that. I don't. The New York law is terrible for me for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, there's no psychiatric indication, so most of my patients, as much as I would love to help them choose a cannabinoid-based medicine that would be helpful to them, I don't really have that option. I mean, I can't recommend it for depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder, even though there's sort of mounting evidence that cannabis may be helpful in these situations. So, but the other issue that I hate is that if I do manage to qualify somebody for the New York law, if I have somebody who, I had a patient with pancreatic cancer, I've got somebody with Crohn's disease, so I can sign those people up, and I have a guy with MS, but I don't have a lot of control over what products they get from the dispensary. There's no whole smoke flower, which is sort of the most common way that it's always been ingested. It's a weird situation where I'm supposed to make a recommendation for medicine, but I don't really know what the medicines are. I don't know what the dispensaries have.
Yeah.
I don't know what the choices are. The best I can do is say that I want a ratio of THC to CBD, which is like high 1-to-1 or low. It's if I were ever choosing a medicine for a patient, I wouldn't be sort of throwing a dart at these very general areas. I would be saying, I want this medicine, and this is how I want the patient to take it. So a lot of doctors are really in over their heads because it's just not the way we usually do things. And, we're used to being sort of having our hands held and sort of being walked through a process. Like if there's a new medicine, a drug rep will come to my office and tell me exactly how to prescribe the medicine, what milligram amount to start with, when to go up to the next dose, what side effects to look like. There's nothing like this happening with cannabis. There's no kind of education. They're not sending me like a good-looking drug rep from the dispensary to tell me what the choices are for the patient. And when I read medical journals, they're full of one kind of ad, and that's big pharma ads. There's nothing about medicinal plants in the medical journals. So, they're fighting a losing battle, I'm afraid, in terms of sort of educating doctors and getting doctors comfortable with working with this medicine.
Yeah.
I guess I gotta step in and bring up. It's very strange to hear you say that in your summation, in your opinion, and if I'm way off base on this, just correct me and I'll apologize. But it sounds like you're saying that the reason why it's not looked at as an actual medicine is just a matter of familiarity, and yet that then rolled into, but a sales guy can come in and sort of pitch me a new pill, and somehow that is a more familiar activity, and so that one's okay, but this one's not.
Yes, we like pills. Pills we like.
Right.
Plants confuse us.
Right. Pills are easy. They're clean, and like I said, they're definitely homogenized and commodified. I mean, you know exactly what is in every single pill. It's much more sort of a mystery what is exactly in these tinctures and extracts that are at the dispensary.
Well, but can we not do that? Can we not have a tincture that is even and balanced and dosable? And
No, we do. We do have tinctures that are. I mean, that's what the New York law is all about. Is sort of medicalizing the plant and having it be more predictable and commodified. But even though they do that, the way that you certify a patient, you don't really get to pick and choose the products. I mean, basically what I write down on the certification is, please give my patient as much leeway as possible to choose their own products, because
there you go. I mean,
because it doesn't say what the products are when I'm clicking on the options.
there's also a lot of people who believe, like Lester Grinspoon, one of them, Julie, that it's the people's medicine, and you can pretty much figure out what you need at a certain point, right?
Yeah, there's actually an interesting database growing. There's a doctor in Maine whose name is Dustin Sulak. Really great guy, and he's got a huge practice. And Maine has been medicinal for a very long time. People forget about Maine because they know California has been in the game a long time, but so has Maine. So he's amassed a pretty sizable database where people are choosing their own medicine, and then he's getting feedback from them. What symptoms are being covered by what meds, what's working better for some people. And the thing that the conclusion he's arrived at is that people can choose their own strain primarily based on how it smells to them.
Yeah.
And that works better
Yeah.
than anything.
That the nose really knows. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking about like terpenes, the same way you pick a lover based on pheromones, you can pick a medicinal strain based on terpenes and based on the way
Beautifully
it smells.
said. That is so beautifully said.
Oh, thank you. So, it's somewhat intuitive, but again, like this sort of, romantic intuition of how you choose your medicine, that's not what I learned in medical school.
Not what you learned in medical school. So, I want to ask you this question, and we can move on then. I mean, you've been talking and advocating on behalf of cannabis and other substances for a long time. Who's most difficult to convince? Doctors, lawmakers, or even your fellow parents?
I'm going to go with lawmakers, actually, having interacted with all three groups for a couple of decades now. I was pretty freaked out when I started talking to the state assemblymen and legislators that are in Albany. I was just like, oh
freaked
my
out?
gosh, I had no idea. Yeah, like
Tell
super entrenched, and like I met with this Republican guy who, first of all, seemed like very repressed and closeted to me, which I thought was maybe a big part of his sort of persona. Who turned out, I think, was really maybe even in the pocket of a vaporizer company. He kept saying that he could never get behind people smoking weed or like rolling up weed. That's not medicine, but he could get behind something where it was like a vaporizer and a cartridge or something like that.
A little skin in the game changes his opinion on.
So that was pretty disheartening. And the guys in Albany, I'm sorry, but they're a really highly dysfunctional group of men. And
we're all sorry about that.
Like, I don't know if you guys remember a few years ago, but there was this thing where they were like locking each other out of the chamber so they couldn't vote. It was like, you can't get into my tree fort. Like I'm pulling up the ladder. I was just
I used to think that was a joke when I heard it. Like they were talking about some metaphor, but no, they were literally locking the doors, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. They don't get a lot done. They're super conservative. As liberal as New York City is, when you go up to Albany, it's kind of like you've gone back in time a couple of decades, and it's very conservative, and real Republican stronghold. So if there's no money involved, I don't think the Republicans are going to get behind it. So maybe our best bet is that they have skin in the game and they invest in vaporizer companies, but.
You look at New York, though.
Choice.
We are not exactly a thriving state. Most of the state is impoverished, right? And you look at the potential of cannabis as an industry, and you think, yeah, this could really work here. They've got a thriving market in New York City, that's for sure.
Right. Well, I mean, I've been saying hemp can make America great again, way before Trump came along. So I definitely, this is a weed that grows wild in all 50 states, easy to grow. Helps to clean the air, helps to clean the soil.
God knows we're going to need it going forward, right? When we have no more EPA.
The flower is a medicine. The seeds are a complete vegetarian protein. And the stalk can be used as biofuel or, fiber, rope, sails, canvas. I mean, it's
Paper.
An incredibly useful plant. Paper.
Bugatti. It makes the doors of Bugatti. Did you know that? It's woven so tightly and so strongly it prevents crashes. Yeah.
Right. Use it. So, this is a completely useful plant, stock to seed, and it really could be helping our economy tremendously. And it's a shame. It is seriously a shame that it can't be grown and that we can't take advantage of it.
It's really pathetic. Okay, so finish this sentence for me. If cannabis was discovered today, ...
It would be hailed as a miracle plant that provides food, fiber, fuel, and medicine for everyone. And it would be heralded as, a godsend of utility, of plant-based utility.
Now, are you high when you say that?
No, sir.
Okay, good. Just need to be clear about that because I don't think that's a radical position anymore. But I remember when I first started into this journey and you said something like that to me, I thought, wow, she's either really right or she's really cracked.
Yeah. I'm really not. I will say that I'm very much not cracked.
You are so not cracked. No, you really are
I'm
not.
currently working on my 5th book, and I've got hundreds of patients in my private practice. And
You
I
ran
do
the
forensic
ER at
work
Bellevue
and-
for what, 17 years? How long did you run the ER
No,
at Bellevue?
I ran the psych ER. I ran the psych ER at Bellevue for 9 years. And I've been a psychiatrist in private practice for 20 years.
Was it harder to run the psych unit at Bellevue than to talk to lawmakers about the possible legalization of cannabis?
No, I really loved Bellevue. It was an amazing job, and I really enjoy insanity, but I don't enjoy sort of entrenched, stubborn, willful ignorance. So I'm better off dealing with.
Do you think it's honestly
psychosis.
willful ignorance? Do you think they don't know, or do you think that it's something else? I tend to think that it takes a very special kind of person to just be completely ignorant about marijuana in the world today.
Yeah.
The
Well,
topics of
some of it-
conversation. Is it a
Here's what I
willful
think,
ignorance,
though.
or is it a motivated?
I do think that there is a long-standing suspicion and hatred between conservative Republicans and hippies, and
Yes.
I do think that our sort of the legacy of pot is that it really came up in the 60s and 70s with counterculture and people who were demonstrating against the war and drop out and be in. So it has this sort of baggage of irresponsibility, amotivation, and subversiveness that makes it scary for people. If you're like a buttoned up conservative and you're kind of far right and churchy, all this stuff is just like, the devil unleashed, and it's really scary. And people are afraid of losing control. They're afraid of being disinhibited. They're afraid of their dark sides, especially somebody who's like closeted and repressed and like afraid of their own sexuality. So I'm not saying that all Republican
Are
lawmakers fit this
Mhm.
mold, but I think that some of them do. And I think, the ones that are really proselytizing family values are the ones you have to look at, and that they've got real, fetish skeletons in their closet.
Well,
So-
and that's why I kind of come there to the stance of like I would be more likely to look at like the money than the mythology or the religion around it. Like the conservative, like I'm so conservative that weed scares me argument kind of falls
Right.
to me as not being as convincing as, oh no,
Yeah.
he just falls on that side of the political spectrum, and there's somebody
Right.
who is selling tobacco or who is, mass manufacturing paper who that would hurt their business. Like,
Right, so
that's
this-
a
I mean,
more viable argument to me than the
I think
than the
that's
fear.
true. I mean, keep in mind I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm always sort of looking for like the Jungian shadow, that's
Very
pushing in
fair.
the dark unconscious, right? But yes, follow the money. The beverage industry, which is alcohol, has 1 or 2 lobbyists per state. Big pharma's got lobbyists like crazy. Petroleum industry, paper industry, cotton industry. I mean, there are a lot of people who stand to lose if we start growing hemp.
In a big
Petroleum
way. Yeah.
and cannabis. Then you're talking about not just petroleum and paper and cotton, but also big pharma. So those are a lot of people with a lot of money, a lot of lobbyists. So there are real vested interests in cannabis not being illegal, and certainly in people not being able to grow their own medicine, which is what I would, my fantasy is that you are in charge of your own health. And if you think that a medicinal plant can help you stay healthy, then you can grow it and ingest it. And, how can that be breaking the law? But it is.
It is madness. One of the, I wonder if it has any argument when you look at a country like Portugal that decriminalized all drug use. About 2002, and teen rates of drug use have dropped, and they're no longer sending people to jail, and it's much cheaper to treat them in treatment centers, and all sorts of social ills sort of got solved pretty inexpensively. I think the same is true for Holland. They have the lowest rate of teens who smoke cannabis in all of Europe, basically.
Yeah.
You can buy it anywhere, basically. So do those facts on the ground ever make any difference to anybody you ever talk to in positions of power?
I hope they do. I mean, we're also looking at Colorado and getting their data and showing, that they have fewer fatal automobile accidents, that they've got fewer fatal opiate overdoses, and
it's
that
pretty
their
impressive, yeah.
teen use their teen use hasn't gone down, but it also hasn't gone up.
No, they've been very good stewards of early legalization, Colorado, don't you think?
Yeah, and yes, I do. And not only have they been coming out with really nice data, but they also have been using some of the proceeds. All of a sudden Colorado's got a bunch of money and they're putting a lot back into education, which is great, but they're also helping to fund cannabis research, which is great because nobody else is funding cannabis research in America.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden Colorado is making $1 million, $2 million grants toward clinical research. So that's also tremendous. I mean, the cannabis post-traumatic stress disorder study is fully funded because of that Colorado money.
That's great, isn't it?
It is great.
And isn't it interesting how cannabis, in its way of helping you forget, actually helps these PTSD folks forget those dark, haunting memories that they can't seem to ever let go of? Isn't it fascinating, sort of? Have you noticed? Have you seen this clinically?
Well, we're waiting to see it clinically. We've just started screening people for the cannabis PTSD study. We had a lot of delays, 6 years worth of delays from the government. And there's still some issues now with the NIDA drug that we've been supplied with, where it's not really a great quality cannabis. And
did they give you that stuff from Mississippi? Is that what they gave you?
Yeah, we got stuff from Mississippi.
Who picked all the stems and seeds out of it?
Exactly. That was the least. I mean, that was part of the problem, that there were visible stems and seeds, but also there was mold. So we're trying to figure out whether we're going to irradiate it or return it or just keep testing it and figure out what to do.
Was it visible mold? Like you could see it on the flowers?
There's no flowers. You should see pictures of this. It's like
What's it look
brown
like?
Dust. It looks like Dusty dirt that's brown. It doesn't look like any kind of ground up flowers.
Wow.
Well, the reason it was sent for testing is because it was visible. So anyway, I may be sort of speaking out of turn here, and that we haven't officially declared that the NIDA drug is unacceptable to us. But I'm pretty disappointed that we waited 6 years for a product from NIDA, and it really wasn't what we asked for. And I mean, the joke I've been making is like, any teenager would turn their nose up at this pot, and we're supposed to use it, with veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder to prove that it can help them.
But this is the same thing that happened with Donald Abrams in the 1990s when he was trying to research with AIDS. It took him 8 years to get cannabis from the Mississippi farm.
They make it hard. They definitely make it hard. It's this total catch-22. I mean, it's this perfect government-induced catch-22 where they say, we don't want to deschedule it or change the scheduling because there's not enough medical evidence that it does anything. And then we're going to make sure that there's no medical evidence generated to make sure it does anything.
The U.S. government, they can be pretty efficient when push comes to shove. Don't you think the U.S. government, when it comes to...
Efficient at hypocrisy?
Yes, extraordinary.
It's
extraordinary.
It's like genius in its simplicity. The thing that's frustrating is that there's plenty of other countries that are generating lots of good research on cannabis, but when America makes its drug laws, they will only use sort of domestic data. But they won't allow any domestic data to be generated.
But they won't allow
so it's very, very convenient for them, very frustrating for us.
And meanwhile, everybody else will continue to use cannabis. I mean, it's never really stopped, has it? No matter what laws, no matter what prohibition has reached.
No, it has. It certainly hasn't stopped. I mean, there's plenty of arrests happening for possession. I mean, New York City is basically the arrest capital of the planet. But
not
there,
so much
it's
anymore,
like,
though.
Well, it's still 85. It was 85% Black and brown people were being arrested in New York City for possession of cannabis, even though there are plenty of white people who were also smoking pot. And I mean, I had a patient just the other day who was like, I smoke around the city all the time, no big deal. And I'm like, yeah, you're white.
You're white.
It's like, it is a big deal if you're not. And, there are huge racial issues at play in, first of all, the original laws for cannabis, but then more importantly, how those laws are now enforced. And there's a real racial bias going on in how the laws are being enforced, which is part of the problem. I mean, I belong to a group of doctors that are pushing for legalization and descheduling, and they're called Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. And, we feel like this is a public health issue, that this sort of racist application of the drug laws is a public health issue because mass incarceration is a public health issue.
I agree.
Certainly
completely.
a mental health issue. I mean,
Totally.
tons of mental patients who are behind bars. I mean, Rikers is a perfect example.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I've seen a lot of junkies. I've seen a lot of alcoholics. I have gotten, between Bellevue and private practice, I have a very good sense of people who are sort of compulsively using substances. And I think that part of the problem is that we have to hide the behavior because it's illegal. We end up having guilt around the behavior. We end up having shame. Because we hide it, we have shame. Because it's illegal, we have to hide it. There's a sort of circle that happens where you end up having guilt and shame, which leads to hiding it, which leads to more compulsive use. When things are out in the open, you're less compulsive. And the other thing is modeling healthy behavior. The example I always give is like if I'm at the restaurant with my kids and they see me order a drink and they see me like have some wine with dinner, I don't chug the wine. I'm not vomiting anywhere. I just like kind of sip the wine. I leave some in my cup. It's not a big deal. But they see me modeling healthy drug taking behavior.
Yeah.
There's no opportunity for modeling healthy drug taking behavior if something is illegal.
Yeah.
And the first casualty in the drug war is information, solid information. The government can't be honest about this medicine and what it can do because they have to say that it can't do anything because it's illegal. It's this kind of circular logic.
Illogic.
So we really need to deschedule.
Well, and it feeds back into the familiarity discussion we were having before. If there really are people who are just afraid of the drug being, a normal, in air quotes, normal person standing up saying like, yeah, I use marijuana. I self-medicate and I use it for fun. And I also use it for, whatever health purposes. And I'm not that scary thing. That's one way to sort of begin to dispel. I did want to touch on something you just said. You said we need to deschedule, and you had mentioned this a couple times before. And what does your organization mean by deschedule? Is that because you also reference it as being medication? Where do you fall on the line of legalization for recreation versus legalization for medication?
Right. Well, the group Doctors for Cannabis Regulation is specifically for legalization and descheduling. There's enough other doctors pushing for medical cannabis. Not everybody is going to go to their doctor and get a card and get prescription, but we would like it so that if someone is choosing to use cannabis, they don't face any sort of legal penalties. They don't end up in jail. They don't end up losing their kids. They don't end up losing their housing rights or food stamps or this sort of thing.
Just like it is in Washington, Oregon, California, about to be in Canada. I mean, this is another alternate reality going on out there.
Yeah, well, about to be in Canada, about to be in Mexico. That's going to be a little awkward for America when the country is to the north.
We're going to have a wall. Don't worry about it. We're going to have big walls. It's going to keep it all out.
The wall's going to keep that
we are going to be the most sober, puritanical society ever come to be. But wait, talk about descheduling, because I think descheduling is crucial here. I think rescheduling is insane.
Well, look, it's, I think the idea is that you compromise and you settle for rescheduling. But we have decided, our board of directors has decided that we don't want to compromise with rescheduling. We really want it to be not scheduled because it doesn't make sense that something that it has a medical value. I mean, if you're gonna
explain rescheduling, because it's so confusing. Okay. Anyway, it's like a product of the Nixon administration. Right. Really. I mean, this is the most arcane thing ever. But keep going.
There are some drugs like cigarettes or alcohol that aren't scheduled. And then there are some drugs that are. And the scheduling, Schedule 1, which is where pot is, says that it has no accepted medical use and it has a high potential for abuse. And then you have drugs in Schedule 2, which are the prescription opiates, which used to be in 3, but they're up to 2. Actually, here's an interesting point. Pure THC pills are Schedule 3. Those can get you more banged up than the whole flower. Because there's no CBD in them at all. They're pure THC. They're very altering. It's hard to drive on them or function on them.
They're pretty unhappy making, actually.
You'd be better off having a puff a day than to have these pills. But these pills are Schedule 3, which implies that there is a medical use and there's not a high risk of dependence. So it doesn't really make sense to have the whole smoked flower as a Schedule 1, and then the prescription THC, 100% THC pill being Schedule 3. But also, it doesn't make sense that an inebriant that is toxic to your liver and your brain, that is more addictive than cannabis, isn't scheduled. Alcohol isn't scheduled. Cigarettes aren't scheduled. Cigarettes kill half their users. Cannabis kills no one. So there's no sort of internal logic with the way that we classify our drugs of abuse or educate people about the drugs of abuse. And it really comes down to lobbying. Big tobacco and the beverage industry has made sure that these drugs aren't scheduled. And, nobody, unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a very organized cannabis lobby.
There really isn't, is there? Have you seen it?
Such unmotivated slackers is the problem.
Yeah, they're out there enjoying the fruits of their
have
unwrought labor.
Why bother?
I have not found that organized lobby. I wish I was a lobbyist in a way, because it just seems like it needs to occur. It seems like all these small organizations have their own little agendas, and no one's looking at the big picture here. Am I correct?
Right.
Have you found it?
Well, here's what I found when I spent some time with getting to know the people of NORML and the people of MPP, and I was pretty dismayed to learn that there was a lot of kind of infighting, and that's our donor list and you can't have our mailing list. And I'm like, wait a minute, aren't we all on the same team? Can't we coordinate? Why are you guys fighting each other? I mean, there's definitely some territorial pissings going on between the organizations, and I think that's just, sorry to say, not only human nature, but kind of male-oriented nature, that there's a little bit of competition and confrontation between the groups. So I agree that they need to be coordinated a bit better. It seems like MPP and Drug Policy Alliance get along pretty well. And NORML and Drug Policy Alliance, I think, get along okay, but it seems like DPP and NORML don't. And there's no room, as far as I'm concerned, there's no room for this kind of territorial pissings. And, everybody has got to cooperate and work together, because even if we all work together, we've got an uphill battle. But
it's
the infighting is just frustrating and ridiculous.
So let me ask you one final question, since you brought up gender. Do you have any, just because I know you like that topic just a little bit.
Can of worms.
But what are your thoughts about plants in relation to gender, in terms of competition?
Well, you know what? I mean, one thing that I've said a bunch about cannabis is that, these are the female flowers. The males are exterminated.
Neutral. Neutered.
They're
pointless, really, aren't they? They're pointless. They don't need.
Sometimes they're pulled out and killed. Sometimes they're just sort of segregated. But we don't really need the males. We like the females. We're fine with female clones. Mm-hmm. What we smoke is a female flower, and it's sort of like the sexually frustrated female flower that keeps reaching out for the male, hoping to have a male. But since there's no males around, they keep getting bigger
and bigger and bigger.
So that's what you want. You want the sexually frustrated females. That's where the good drug is. But this, to me, the sort of the war on drugs and our government's sort of maligning this medicinal plant is an extension of the Republican war on women. That there is, to me, some sort of denial of the feminine, yin suppression. I mean, I could talk to you for an hour about how we suppress yin energy. America is very yang oriented. It's all about having a vector and going out there and having results and being competitive, and it's not about sort of being receptive and hanging back and taking in data and then making a decision. So for thousands of years, men have been sort of taught to not be emotional and to suck it up and man up and to push all that feminine energy down. And now I think women are really getting that message too. The women are being encouraged to sort of man up and don't cry. And I think more women are taking antidepressants because of that sort of suppression of yin. So to me, the drug war is just like another extension of this sort of suppression of female energy and suppression of yin.
Julie, if I was ever losing my mind, which maybe I do every day, I would call you first.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you.
I'm at your service.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Julie is fantastic, and I want to hear more from her going forward. But I want to also tell you guys about what we're going to do in the next episode, because it is really interesting. The world of edibles is something that's been ripe for a revolution for a long time. My problem with edibles is that it's so hard to know how to dose. Somebody gives you a brownie and you just don't know. What do they say? It's like you say, how much is in it? They say, I don't know. I followed the recipe.
Yeah, you know.
And the last time I did that,
Or maybe didn't follow a recipe.
I was catatonic for about 5 hours last time I did that. It was not comfortable. Okay. The other problem is they take so damn long to kick in. Do you ever have that experience?
Yeah, you know, I currently have a chocolate bar that I'm working through that I'm literally taking 1 centimeter cubes to get to a small enough and manageable dose size, and then it's an hour before you realize.
And you never know if it's going to work or it isn't going to work, or if it's too much or too little. So that's a problem. So Matthew and I recently met a fellow who has figured out a way of infusing sugar with cannabinoids, with THC and CBD, basically, mostly THC. And the incredible thing about these sugars is you can dose them very minutely, and they uptake in 15 minutes.
And
in other
water
words,
soluble.
They're water soluble, so you can mix them in club soda or seltzer or anything like that and make a delicious cocktail. And the effect is fast, and the flavor is incredible.
Oh, out of this world.
I mean, the man is a chef. He knows what he's doing, and he has made a most delicious syrup, none of which I've ever tried before. The only other drinkables I've had were sort of disgusting, and also really high dose. So we went to a party a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was a really interesting party. What did you think, Matthew?
It was a great experience, sort of a modern day marijuana speakeasy. A couple different cocktails on the menu, each one microdosed,
2.5 milligrams, right?
These nice little bumps of just uplifting soda pop.
So what was extraordinary is there were 60 people, most of whom were strangers. And this is amazing in New York. They came in and they stayed for 3.5, 4 hours. And everybody sort of rose at the same level. Nobody got wasted. Nobody got drunk. Nobody was out of control. Everybody was intimate, and the more we kept talking to each other and learning about each other, the closer everybody felt. And we must have talked to 30 people after the party. What was the feedback you got?
Oh man, everybody had a wonderful time. There was literally a mob around the cotton candy machine because hey, it's sugar, you can do all this kind of stuff. It was almost the diametric opposite of what you would expect from a 4-hour group hangout in a typical bar.
Yeah. And it was exactly the opposite of what you would expect from a 4-hour pot party also.
Yeah.
This was the post-prohibitionist, microdosed, drinkable party where cannabis is consumed, and it was completely cool. So that's our next guest in a couple of weeks. I really want you to tune in and listen to this, because this guy he's eccentric, he's amazing, and he's really on the forefront of something revolutionary.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.